My name is Savannah, I am 33 years old, currently living in Dallas, and I am the founder of a women's athletic apparel brand. I spent nearly a decade building my career and a life that seemed perfect beside my husband Ethan, whom I trusted completely. That evening, in the glittering ballroom of the hotel where I was hosting our 5-year wedding anniversary, everything had been arranged with meticulous care. White roses, pale golden candles, French wine, and more than 70 guests, friends, family, and close business partners. I had planned to announce a business expansion project that Ethan and I had been nurturing for the past year. But then, just seconds before I stepped onto the stage, my stepsister Morgan, 31, stood up in the middle of the crowd, took the microphone and smiled. She enunciated each word. I have some good news. I'm pregnant. And the father of the baby is Savannah's husband, Ethan. No one could get a word out. Not a single breath. Ethan froze. I felt as if I had been dragged straight down into hell in the middle of my own celebration. Have you ever been betrayed by a family member right in front of all the people you trust most? If this story hurts you as it hurts me, please leave a comment below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to hear the full truth behind that shocking blow. Because what you're about to hear is even harsher than what happened that night. I no longer clearly remember my mother's face. Old photos had yellowed, and the memory faded like morning mist burned away by the sun. My mother died in a car accident when I was 8. At the time, I didn't fully understand what loss meant. I only knew that from that day on I had no one to run to in the middle of the night, no soft lullaby to fall asleep to. My father, Richard, worked in construction. He was a quiet but responsible man. He never spoke much about feelings, and he wasn't the type to hold his daughter and comfort her. Instead, he gave me stability. A safe home, meals on time, a private study with a new desk lamp, and a college savings fund he quietly contributed to each month. When I was 15, my father brought a new woman home. Diane, then nearly 40, had an elegant appearance, always deliberate about every hair and every piece of jewelry. She never shouted or acted rude, yet she had a way of making me feel superfluous in my own house. Along with her came Morgan, Diane's daughter from a previous relationship, 2 years younger than me. Morgan had golden, bouncy curls like a doll and always dressed neatly, as if she'd stepped out of a teen fashion magazine. From the start, I sensed her scrutinizing gaze and a half-smile, though she maintained a polite demeanor in front of my father. My father married Diane after just 1 year of dating. The wedding was simple with few guests. I stood beside him in a light blue dress Diane had chosen, and I felt a chill in the middle of a Texas summer. From the day they moved in together, the house changed. The photo frames my mother had hung were replaced by abstract paintings Diane brought. The living room gradually smelled of perfumes I did not recognize. The kitchen I used to cook in with my father became Diane's territory, where I was reminded if I left a knife out of place or didn't wipe the counter after breakfast. My father remained my father. He still provided, still asked about my schoolwork, still drove me when he had free time. But slowly, the two-person dinners he and I used to share became less frequent. Morgan was driven around in a private car by her mother, took dance and music lessons while I attended extra math classes at the public school nearby. Whenever I got a high grade, my father would personally tape the test to the refrigerator. I saw Morgan glance, then heard Diane gently say, "Richard, I think those should be hung in Savannah's room instead. The fridge is for shared space." My father took the paper down a few days later, quietly gave it to me and said, "I'll keep it in my desk." I nodded and smiled, but inside I felt a tightness. As I grew up, the distance between Morgan and me became clearer. We never had big fights, but every word she spoke carried a hidden competitiveness. When I received a partial scholarship to UT Austin, Morgan told her friends, "Savannah got it because she's a STEM student, she doesn't need looks." When I started my first job at a sports company, Morgan told her mother, "She sells activewear but acts like a Fortune 500 CEO." My father always defended me, but only in quiet ways. He wasn't one for confrontation, and I understood that. But each time he praised me in front of Diane, I saw her press her lips together and turn away to make tea as if she hadn't heard. Morgan grew up indulged by her mother. Anything she wanted, from a new iPhone, concert tickets to trips across Europe, Diane provided one way or another. My father seemed to agree as long as the family's peace remained intact. I began to learn independence, paying for my own tuition by working part-time at the campus gym. After graduation, I didn't ask anyone for money to start my business. I began by designing small sets of workout clothes, selling them online order by order. Every dollar I earned was sweat and sleepless nights. A few years later, my brand caught the attention of local press. I had my own office, staff, and loyal customers. In a TV interview, I mentioned my father as someone who had always supported me despite not speaking much. That day, he called and said, "I am proud of you." I cried silently. But precisely as I began to achieve something, Morgan seemed unable to tolerate it. She often came to my company under the guise of visiting, but in truth to drop comments like, "You're really good. If I had a rich boyfriend like Ethan, I could probably start a company easily too." Ethan is my husband, the man I met at a business seminar, someone who never let me pay when we ate out, and the one who always stooped to tie my shoelaces after our Sunday morning runs. He knew about my family history and once said, "I don't need anyone else to validate you. You're strong enough to write your own story." I believed him. Until the 5-year anniversary party, the place where, in a single short minute, Morgan shattered everything I thought was real right before my eyes. She didn't just ruin the event. She dropped a bomb into my mind, into the marriage I had guarded, into the fragile family ties I had worked for over 15 years. I stood there, frozen, under dozens of eyes waiting to see how I would react. Ethan still hadn't said a word. Morgan stood tall, one hand on her belly as if offering living proof. Only my father, Richard, stepped toward me first. He said nothing, only took my hand, the hand that had gone ice cold as stone. And at that moment I understood that everything in the past had led to this point. The indifference, the favoritism, the small barbs, they had all piled up and now erupted like an uncontrollable storm. The only thing I did not yet know was that the storm had only begun. I once thought that if I tried hard enough, if I persevered long enough, every dream could come true, whether a career or motherhood. But there are things that, despite pouring out every ounce of effort, remain beyond one's control. After the wedding, Ethan and I settled into life quickly. The small house in the northern Dallas suburbs with a backyard big enough for flowers and a few vegetable beds was the dream we built together. Every weekend, Ethan would drive me to the farmer's market, and we'd come home to simple, warm dinners. I built my company from a tiny basement studio. Back then, everything was a few designs on paper, a small sewing machine, and a customer list under 20 people. I learned to source fabric from local mills, build a website, answer every email, and package every order. There were nights I fell asleep at the drafting table and woke only to start another day exhausted. But I never complained because I believed in what I was doing. My husband was my quiet but steady companion. He didn't grasp all the technical terms of my industry, but he brought coffee every morning, read every article about my brand, and hugged me when the market felt unforgiving. In the 3rd year, I opened my first retail location at a small mall in Plano. About 40 people attended the grand opening, and when the ribbon was cut, I cried. Not because of the store itself, but because the night before I had received fertility test results. My uterine lining was too thin to carry a pregnancy. The doctor said gently, without comfort, "The success rate will be very low, even with medical assistance." I nodded and thanked him, then walked out of the clinic feeling as if I had dropped something irretrievable. We didn't give up. I tried hormone injections for 3 consecutive months, going to work with a swollen face from side effects. Ethan held my hand at every clinic visit, saying little, simply letting me lean on him. Then came 3 cycles of IVF, each a hope that was quietly crushed. My family learned about it after I was hospitalized due to a drug reaction. My father awkwardly visited with a basket of fruit and a worried look I rarely saw. Diane came along, her voice gentle as always. "Don't put too much pressure on yourself. If you can't have children, it's not the end of the world." I nodded even though my heart felt full of thorns. Morgan didn't bother to hide her glee. At a family dinner, when I refused wine because of treatment, she half joked, half seriously, "I don't want to be a mother yet. Lucky my body hasn't betrayed me that way." No one spoke. Only the fork and knife sounds remained. I pressed my lips together to stop my hand from trembling. On another occasion, Morgan popped into my showroom unannounced. She threw an arm around my shoulders like we were close, then looked around with an evaluating gaze. "You're really talented. Opened a company, have a store, a handsome husband. Just missing a child to complete the collection, right?" I said nothing. I walked into the office, closed the door, and sat quietly while my throat tightened. Her words were like a needle into the softest part of me. I didn't respond or accuse, but I remembered. Not because I was angry, but because she had hit the most tender spot. Every time a pregnant woman passed by, I asked myself where I had gone wrong. Was it because I chose my career? Because I didn't take better care of my body? As I wasn't deserving? Ethan always held me and said, "You are everything I need. If we don't have children, we still have each other." But on nights when he slept soundly, I would open my laptop and search for new methods, new threads of hope people might have found around the world. I kept a little gray baby sweater I knitted during treatment, hiding it in my desk drawer so no one, not even Ethan, would see. It was how I protected the most fragile part of myself. After 5 years of marriage, my company had 3 locations, press praise, and steady revenue. I stood on more stages, attended larger events, and was called an inspirational woman. Yet when the lights went out and I returned to a quiet home, Morgan's voice echoed like cold metal. "You're good at business, but you fail at being a mother." I couldn't answer or counter and lacked the courage to forget. I folded the gray sweater, hid it deep in the drawer, then got up and continued to live as if everything were fine. The Rosemont Hotel on Oaklawn Avenue shone with golden lights that night. On the rooftop, the terrace was draped in white flowers, fragrant candles, and silver ribbons that fluttered in the breeze. Everything was exactly as I had pictured. Elegant, refined, and warm enough to make my loved ones feel appreciated. I had spent more than 2 months planning this party. It wasn't only for our 5-year anniversary, it was also to announce the new branch of the athletic brand I founded, the project I had nurtured for over a year and that had finally taken shape. Ethan encouraged me to host it. He said, "We have every right to be proud of what we've built together." I remember smiling when he said that. Together. Those 2 words sounded gentle and safe. The guest list included college friends, partners from neighboring cities, and a few well-known figures in the fashion industry. My father, Richard, stood by my side the whole evening, looking more radiant than usual. He toasted and talked, looking at me as if a part of his life had been rewritten for the better. Diane and Morgan arrived late, as they often did. Mother and daughter wore pastel lace dresses, entering with polite smiles and eyes that swept the room as if scrutinizing. I greeted them socially, maintaining the necessary distance. Ethan squeezed my hand under the table, his eyes reassuring. We planned to make the announcement during dessert. I had ordered a large cake, frosted white with a line of gold lettering, "Strive X Highland Park, a new beginning." It marked the company's 4th milestone and the labor of love I had poured my hopes into, at a time when other hopes in my life had begun to fall away. As the servers rolled the cake into the center of the room, the lights softened. I reached for the microphone, lightly touching Ethan's wrist to indicate he should step up beside me. But before I could stand, Morgan walked to the center, moving slowly as if taking the stage. She didn't look at me, she took the microphone from the event coordinator. I was flustered, about to speak, but Ethan pressed his hand to my shoulder. "Let's see what she has to say." Morgan stood tall, one hand resting on her belly, her eyes sweeping the room like a seasoned performer about to announce the lead role of her life. "Excuse me for interrupting," her voice rang, calm and measured. "I have some good news. I'm pregnant. And the father of the baby is Savannah's husband, Ethan." I didn't hear anything after that. The entire room fell silent. A glass shattered in a distant corner. No one laughed. No one moved. I stood rooted to the spot, the blood drained from my face. Ethan turned to look at me, panic on his features, then faced Morgan. "What are you talking about?" "Morgan, are you crazy?" he asked. Morgan did not step back. "You know it, Ethan," she said, as if the 2 of them had just whispered it in a closed room. "We agreed we would say it out loud, and I can't hide it anymore." The ground beneath me lost its firmness. A murmur spread through the room. Some people looked at me, others bowed their heads. I heard someone whisper, "Unbelievable," and then phones started lighting up, people taking photos and recording. Ethan moved toward Morgan, his voice urgent. "Stop it. What story are you inventing? Savannah, I didn't do anything wrong. I swear." I couldn't hear the rest. My ears rang, my throat tightened as if someone had gripped it. In the next few seconds I tried to step back, but my legs would not obey. The last thing I saw was my father's face go pale and his hand raised as if calling me. Then everything went black. I woke up in a hotel room with dim lights and a faint smell of antiseptic in the air. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, eyes red, his shirt rumpled and his tie loosened. "Are you okay?" he asked in a hoarse voice. I didn't answer. I just looked at him as if he were a stranger. "She's lying," he went on. "Morgan made this up. I would never do something like that." I forced myself to sit up, a sharp pain at the base of my skull. "I want to go home. The doctor said you should rest for a few more hours." "I want to go home," I repeated, this time slower and clearer. Ethan was silent. Finally he nodded. "Hey, I'll get the car." I sat back in the room, my hands on my thighs, and images from that evening replayed like a slowed nightmare. I saw Morgan's thin smile, the cake left uncut, my father standing motionless beside the banquet tables, and me, Savannah, the woman praised for her grit and success, collapsing in the middle of everything I thought had been built on the firmest ground. There was a soft knock at the door. Not Ethan. My father entered, holding my coat. "Do you want to say anything?" he asked. I shook my head. Then, when he placed his hand on my shoulder, tears came to my eyes. "I believe you," he said briefly. "And if you need me, I'll be there." I nodded, clutching the edge of my jacket, speechless. Because deep down I still did not understand what had just happened. And the scariest part was that behind Morgan's smile, there was something more sinister than a lie. I woke the next morning in the familiar bedroom, but the sense of safety I used to have on mornings was gone. The curtains were slightly open. The morning light made the room feel cold rather than warm. Ethan was not beside me. His pillow still bore the imprint of where he had been, as if he had left minutes before. But that absence, both on the bed and inside me, was unmistakable. I didn't get up right away. I lay still, letting everything unravel in my head like a film replaying uncontrollably. Morgan's voice echoed, confident, smooth, rehearsed to the point of precision. "I'm pregnant, and the father is Savannah's husband." Then the looks, the whispers, the heavy silence, and Ethan, standing there, panicked but not immediately denying it. My phone had been buzzing nonstop since last night. I had turned off notifications when we left the hotel, but it kept lighting up on the bedside table. I unlocked it and shame swept over me like a flood. In my old friend group chat were a few gentle messages, but most were curiosity wrapped in pity. Someone even sent the clip of Morgan's announcement. A person behind her had filmed it just enough to catch Ethan's stunned face in the moment I slumped. My company's Facebook page was also under attack with anonymous vicious comments. "A successful woman who couldn't keep her husband. How sad," one person wrote. Someone else was crueler. "Maybe his wife is infertile, so he had to find someone else." I clenched my phone as if squeezing it could crush those words at once. Ethan came into the room while I sat motionless at the edge of the bed. He carried a cup of coffee and set it down without a word. The hot aroma mixed with the silent tension in the air. "Do you want anything to eat?" he asked, his voice low and raw from a sleepless night. I shook my head. "Not hungry." Ethan sat across from me, hands folded together. "I don't know how to start. I didn't do that. I swear. Morgan made it up. I don't know why, but it's not true." I looked at him, the man I had loved fiercely, who had held my hand in cold clinics and whispered, "Whether we have children or not, I choose you." But yesterday, when everything broke, he had been silent for too long. In the moment when a firm denial was needed, he had stood there, bewildered and helpless. "Why did I faint?" I asked. He frowned. "The doctor said low blood pressure combined with psychological pressure." "Not because I'm weak," I said softly, almost as a reminder. "But because I didn't expect you to let her say that in front of everyone, and not respond." I was shocked. I didn't expect Morgan to do that. I didn't think she would dare? I interrupted. Or didn't think she knew? Ethan fell silent. I did not need an answer. I wasn't even sure I wanted to hear more right then. Uncertainty often hurts far worse than an exposed truth. In the afternoon, my father came by. He brought a small gift box, not to console me so much as to give me a reason to get out of bed. Inside was the leather notebook I had given him when my company started. On the first page he had written in his handwriting, "All good beginnings need to be backed by truth." I smiled faintly, holding the notebook without feeling any lighter. "Do you want to hear me tell the truth?" he asked, sitting by the window. I nodded. I don't believe Morgan. But Diane believes her absolutely. She says Morgan would never make up something like that. She thinks Ethan slipped up and Morgan simply couldn't hide it. I turned my face away. I wasn't surprised Diane would defend her daughter. Since she set foot in our house, she had always found ways to favor Morgan, not through grand statements but through thousands of small details. Special cookies only for Morgan, family conversation always beginning with "Morgan told me," and the averted looks whenever my father praised me publicly. What does Diane want? I asked. She wants Ethan to admit and apologize. And if he doesn't, she's talking about going public with it to the press. I gave a bitter laugh. She's threatening my company with bad press? Not exactly a threat. But Morgan has hinted things to a few people in the media. I closed my eyes. Not from fatigue but because the old feeling returned. The sense of being pushed into a corner like when I was 16 watching Morgan get the first car while I worked extra shifts to buy a used laptop. I believe you, he repeated, his voice steadier, firmer than before. And if needed, I'll stand between them. Whoever is angry, whoever is fractured, I will not leave you alone. I nodded slightly, swallowing the tightness in my throat. After he left, I stood and went out to the backyard. Sunlight had lengthened across the lawn. I looked at the rose wall Ethan had planted, remembering mornings spent tending each small bush together. Everything was still there, but trust was no longer whole. And while Ethan kept trying to prove something, another question began to form inside me. If Morgan made it all up, how could she be so certain? And why didn't Ethan fight back right away when he had the chance? Something was missing. I could not keep pretending I did not sense it. 3 days after the party, I went to the company office, not to work but to pull every recording from the security cameras I had installed around the venue. I had thought we only needed them if someone lost a wallet or an item went missing. I didn't expect those small cameras tucked in plant pots and ceiling corners would be the only things that could not lie. I handed the hard drive to a man named Lucas, a friend of one of my longtime partners. Lucas used to be a police officer and had switched to private investigation. He didn't say much. He sat quietly and opened the footage from the evening. We watched every minute of the party, from the first guest arriving to the moment I collapsed. I watched the screen intently, my heart slow but heavy. Lucas slowed playback during the main course and then switched to a ceiling camera on the left, near the main table where Ethan and I sat. "Pause it there," I said when I saw Morgan approaching our table from the far end of the room. Lucas rewound a few seconds. We could clearly see Morgan walking up behind Ethan holding something small. It looked like an envelope, and gently tapping him on the shoulder. Ethan turned, took it with one hand while the other still held his glass. She didn't say anything. She handed him the envelope and continued on, like it was a small note about the menu or a belated toast. I tried to read Ethan's reaction. He looked at the envelope for a few seconds, then tucked it into his inner vest pocket. His face wasn't overly surprised, but it wasn't completely indifferent either. Nothing conclusive but not entirely innocent. "Can we pause there?" I asked. Lucas nodded and hit pause. "Can you watch what happens after I faint? Does anyone touch his pocket?" I asked. Lucas moved to the next segment. Everything became chaotic. Guests rushing to me, Ethan bending over to help, calling the medics. As he stood, the envelope slipped from his pocket and fell onto the carpet between two chair legs. A server walked by without noticing. A while later, when most guests had left, a man in a black vest came over and picked the envelope up. He flipped through it and put it in his back pocket. Lucas zoomed in on the face. "I know him," I whispered. "James, the event supervisor. The hotel's staff." "I'll contact him," Lucas said shortly. The next morning Lucas brought the envelope to my office. He said James didn't say much, only asked, "Is it something serious?" Then handed it back with a courteous but unfriendly look. I held the envelope with both hands. The paper was thick ivory, embossed with the logo of an obstetrics clinic in Addison. I took a deep breath and opened it. Inside was an ultrasound print, a faint image of an embryo a few weeks old. At the bottom was the patient's name, Morgan Whitaker, with the date of the exam 3 weeks earlier. I looked at Lucas. He took the paper into the light, studied it, then pulled out his phone and called a contact in the healthcare system. 10 minutes later he hung up and said, "This image isn't from that clinic. There's no patient by that name in their records for that month." I nodded silently. Something else inside me cracked. Not pain but a rising anger. I came home late that afternoon. Ethan sat in the living room with his laptop open and piles of papers scattered around. He looked up and closed the computer. "Where did you go?" he asked. "The office. I needed to review the cameras," I replied, meeting his eyes. Ethan nodded slowly. "Did you find anything?" I set the envelope on the table in front of him. "This fell out of your pocket when you helped me up. The hotel staff picked it up." Ethan looked at it without speaking for a few seconds, then opened the envelope and pulled the ultrasound out. His face drained of color. "What do you think?" he asked. "This is fake. The clinic confirmed there is no patient named Morgan during that period. And that image was taken from a public stock site used for illustrative purposes. I have enough evidence, Ethan." He leaned back in the chair and sighed, running a hand over his forehead. "I didn't sleep with her," he said, voice thick. "I told you. But I admit I failed to keep Morgan from getting close. One night, after a long meeting, I went out drinking with a partner. Morgan showed up at the bar. She started a conversation saying she wanted business advice. I watched him closely. Ethan did not look at me. He was talking to himself as if confessing to his conscience. I didn't take her home. But I didn't tell you because I knew you would be furious. Maybe she misunderstood something or she made it up on purpose. I'm not involved with her. I swear." I squeezed my hands tight. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I was afraid. Afraid that if I told you, you'd believe it was true. I was afraid of losing you." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the back garden. The white roses were still blooming evenly, fragile clusters against a bleak autumn sky. Inside me was a chaos. Morgan had lied, but Ethan was not entirely blameless. No one was completely right and no one was innocent enough for me to trust as before. I didn't want to answer immediately. I needed time. And I needed to clarify something more important. Why did Morgan do that? What was her real motive? Because if she fabricated everything, this was not merely jealousy. It was a scheme. And I, the one who always thought I controlled everything, might have been drawn into a game whose rules I never understood. 2 days after I confronted Ethan in the living room, Lucas called, his voice more urgent than usual. He said he had tracked down someone who could connect the dots of the whole story Morgan had been trying to hide. Someone who had been very close to her long enough to see through the elaborate games she had been staging. "His name is Daniel Harper," Lucas said. 38 years old, a financial advisor living in Fort Worth. He's Morgan's ex. They broke up about 8 months ago. It didn't end well, apparently. I sat silently behind the wheel, the morning breeze drifting through the cracked window. Outside, everything went about its familiar rhythm. Joggers, children on bicycles, the smell of fresh bread from the corner bakery. Inside me, something shifted like an old door about to spring open. I nodded, though Lucas couldn't see me. "I want to meet him." We arranged to meet at a dated cafe on Magnolia. Quiet enough to hear every word, yet busy enough that the conversation wouldn't feel unbearably tense. Daniel arrived on time. He was tall and thin, with the weary look of someone who'd just emerged from a long, heavy dream. "You're Savannah?" he asked, voice hoarse but polite. I nodded. "Thank you for meeting me." He sat, ordered a black iced coffee, and looked at me as if weighing where to begin. Finally, he exhaled and spoke slowly. "Morgan is attractive. No denying that. When I first met her, I thought I'd found a smart, sharp woman who knew what she wanted. But the more I was around her, the more I realized she didn't want love. She wanted control." I studied him. There was an honest fatigue in his eyes, the kind a man has after many winters without a warm coat. "What did she say to you?" Daniel smiled faintly. "That if I didn't get serious, she'd give me a reason to stay. Thought it was a joke. Until one night she brought an ultrasound." My heart tightened. He paused for a moment, then continued. "I panicked. She told me I was the father, that she was 6 weeks along, and that she wouldn't force me but wouldn't hide it from anyone." I stayed silent. Daniel reached into his jacket, pulled out an old phone, and scrolled to a photo of an ultrasound that looked very much like the one I had seen in the envelope the other night. The text on the image was unclear, so I had a friend who works at a hospital check it. He said it was a stock training image, not an actual medical record. When I confronted her, she screamed, cried, and told me I was doubting the person I loved, that I didn't deserve to be a father. Daniel looked at me. I broke up with her a week later. Cut her off completely. But she kept texting for months, sometimes soft, sometimes threatening. And Ethan? I asked quietly. Daniel shrugged. I'm not sure whether she actually slept with him. But from what she did to me, I don't think making up a pregnancy would make her hesitate. He showed me another message thread. Morgan had texted someone named Dr. Miles asking for a new ultrasound with a closer date, and promised to pay cash. The message included a screenshot of a transfer to a strange account, and a short thank you. You're a lifesaver as always. Who is this doctor? I asked. Suspended 3 years ago in Oklahoma for falsifying medical documents as part of an insurance fraud ring. He's laying low somewhere in Arlington now, Daniel answered without hesitation. I leaned back looking out the window. The old oak in front of the cafe was shedding yellow leaves in waves. I felt like I was sitting in the eye of the storm Morgan had made, meticulous, calculated, cold, and full of intent. She doesn't love anyone, Daniel added slowly. She loves having hold. I turned back to him, suddenly seeing another layer of the story I'd only been a bystander to until now. Can I keep a copy of these messages? I asked. Take as many as you need, Daniel said, his laugh small and almost sad. If I can help you avoid what I got trapped in, that will feel worth it. Before we parted, I stood and reached out my hand. Daniel squeezed it lightly, and for a brief moment I felt a kinship with someone who had weathered the same toxic wind. That afternoon I returned to the company, went to my office, opened my computer, and backed up all the evidence to a separate hard drive. I called Lucas and asked him to start verifying Dr. Miles's identity and to look for any unusual activity from his account over the last 2 months. Before we hung up, Lucas asked, "What are you going to do next?" I paused, then spoke slowly. I won't act on impulse. I want the whole picture. Every detail. Every person. This is a script. Morgan surely didn't write it alone. I looked out the window. Night was falling, bringing an unnamed heaviness. And my thoughts turned to another name. Diane. The woman who always smiled gently, who would defend her daughter at all costs. The woman who insisted Morgan would never lie about something so serious. The woman who once whispered in my ear, "You need to learn to stay silent to keep what is precious." Perhaps what I was facing was not just Morgan. Perhaps it was a web woven from delicate, calculating threads. And I, exhausted as I was, would have to unravel each one. Because if I didn't, no one else would expose them for me. I chose Sunday evening for the family meeting. Not because I thought anyone would be milder at the end of the week, but because I wanted to make sure that after this confrontation, no one could sleep easy while carrying a lie. Dinner was at my father's old house, the home he'd lived in for more than 30 years. Where my mother's photo once hung on the central wall of the living room before Diane replaced it with a cold abstract painting. I didn't invite many people. Just my father, Ethan, Diane, and Morgan. No friends, no colleagues, no lawyers. Just a small family, at least on paper. When I entered, every eye fixed on me. Ethan had arrived early, sitting quietly by the window. My father stood near the fireplace, hands folded, looking tense but resolute. Diane wore her usual composed expression, eyes scanning the room. Morgan sat with her legs crossed, dark red nails tapping the table in an impatient rhythm as if annoyed to be there. I sat down, opened my bag, and took out a small hard drive. "Before anyone speaks," I began, my voice steady but not cold, "I want to share a few things. Not to argue, but to end it." Morgan laughed softly, full of contempt. "End it? Are you planning to give me a moral lesson?" I didn't reply. I plugged the drive into the laptop set on the table. The large connected screen displayed sharp footage from the party. Morgan walking up to Ethan, handing him an envelope, and then leaving. No audio, but the images were clear enough for no one to deny. "What is that?" Diane asked, frowning. "That envelope contained the ultrasound Morgan used to claim she was pregnant," I answered. "It's fake, printed from a stock image. Not issued by any legitimate medical facility." Morgan burst into laughter, folding her arms. "You brought a slideshow? My God, you are obsessed with control." I moved to the next file, the audio recording of my conversation with Daniel, Morgan's ex. His voice played, clear and direct. "She did the same to me. A fake ultrasound, the tears, the threats. When I found out, I had to block her everywhere because I couldn't take the pressure. No one spoke. She bought a fake ultrasound from a suspended doctor. I have the messages, the transfer receipt, and the comparison images, Daniel's voice continued. Morgan sprang up, hitting the table so hard a glass bounced. Are you humiliating me? You're jealous because you can't have children, so you want to drag me down with you? My father gripped my hand but did not interrupt. Ethan remained silent. Diane stood and took a few steps toward me. Savannah, you've gone too far. You're digging up the past, dragging people who are no longer relevant into a story. Why? Because my daughter is telling the truth and you won't accept it. I looked at her. No one made anything up here. The evidence is right in front of you. From the images to witness statements to the payment account. Morgan is not pregnant. She fabricated it. Morgan began to cry, tears falling as if planned. You've always tried to take everything from me. Since we were kids. You're the biological daughter, you have everything. I only have my mother. And now, you want to steal my dignity too. No one is stealing anything, I said slowly. I just want the truth back. What you made up is not a childish mistake. It's calculated. You know I can't have children. You know Ethan is the most precious thing I have. You didn't need a knife. You only needed one sentence in front of 70 people to stab me where it hurts. My father's voice hardened. Enough. Silence fell. Richard, Diane said. Shut up, Diane. He looked at Morgan, then Diane. I have let this go on too long. I have been silent for too many years. From small things to now out of control. But today I cannot pretend anymore. He turned to me. Savannah, I'm sorry. For not speaking up sooner. For leaving you alone to endure the snide remarks and resentment in this house. Ethan stood and walked slowly to my side. I did not betray her, he said, the first words he had spoken since the meeting began. But I also was not brave enough to protect her at the right moment. I admit that. Morgan yelled, You coward. Diane put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, trying to pull her back into her chair. Morgan squirmed, hands trembling. What do you people want? Want me to kneel and apologize? Want me to vanish from this fake family? I looked at her for a long moment, then spoke slowly. No one wants you to disappear. I only want you to stop. Stop making up things. Don't turn other people into tools for your anger and jealousy. Morgan turned away and buried her face in her hands. Diane froze as if stunned. I stood, packed the laptop into my bag. This conversation should end here, I said. No one stopped me. No one called my name. I walked out the door without looking back. Behind me, something had begun to crumble. Not just a family, but an illusion that had lasted for years and no longer held its shape. I once believed the worst pain was when a close relative deliberately struck at the most vulnerable part of you. But no. There is a deeper, more insidious hurt when the person you have held through storms is not honest enough to walk the rest of the path with you. 3 days after the confrontation, Lucas sent me a brief summary by email, just a few lines. But each word felt like a clear cut. Morgan is not pregnant. Whitestone Hotel security footage shows she and Ethan met privately 3 times over the past 2 months, in the third-floor lounge. There is no sign of public intimacy, but the timing coincides with nights Ethan said he was working late or traveling unexpectedly. I finished reading and felt cold all over. I sat in the car, still holding my phone, the screen long since gone dark. There was no erupting anger, no sudden tears, only the sensation of every vessel in my heart tightening bit by bit. That night Ethan came home late. He hung his coat up, walked into the kitchen as usual, and asked if I wanted anything to eat, as if life were continuing normally. But I could not go on as before. We need to talk, I said, my voice low. Ethan looked at me, paused, then pulled a chair out and sat across from me. The kitchen felt smaller than it ever had, even though everything remained tidy. I placed the printed email from Lucas on the table. Ethan read it, his eyes moving slowly across each line. When he reached the final line, he let the paper fall and did not look away from me. You hired someone to follow me? He asked, as if trying to keep calm. I hired someone to find the truth. What you couldn't give me, I replied. He leaned back in his chair, tipped his head and sighed. A silence stretched between us. Finally he nodded, slow and heavy, as if admitting something to himself that he had avoided for weeks. I met with Morgan. 3 times. Not to have an affair, but to talk. I don't know why I agreed at first. Maybe guilt. Maybe because I realized I had hurt you so much. I stayed silent. The first time, he went on, was after the day we got the failed IVF results. You said nothing all evening. We slept with our backs to each other. And I went for a drink. Morgan texted, said she was nearby and asked if I wanted to talk. I thought it would be just coffee. But she took me to a lounge. I looked into his eyes. And what happened that night? Ethan lowered his head. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. She kissed me. I reacted too slowly. Not fast enough. And I let things go past the line. I leaned back in my chair. In my head, all sound fell away. Every image of his mornings making coffee, our dinners together, the quiet walks after clinic appointments, they all started to recede like an old film slipping off its reel. Ethan continued, it was only that once. After that I didn't meet her privately. I avoided her and I lied to you, yes. But I don't love her. There was no relationship. Morgan fabricated the pregnancy not because of me, but because she wanted to destroy you. I laughed, but it wasn't relief. It was bitterness rising up. And you helped her build this by staying silent? Ethan looked at me and did not deny it. I stood and walked to the window. The pale streetlight cast my shadow long and distorted across the wall. You didn't just betray me through an action, I said without turning back. You betrayed me in the moment Morgan stood up at the party and spoke that sentence in front of everyone. And you said nothing. He stood. I tried. But I was afraid. I turned to him. My expression was no longer cold, just quiet. Afraid of losing me, or afraid of losing the image of the good husband you were trying to keep? Ethan stepped forward a pace. I was wrong. But I'm not the architect of this whole plot. I'm a weak man who got swept into chaos. But I love you, Savannah. I never stopped loving you. I looked at him for a long time. You love me, I repeated. But not enough to keep me with honesty. I walked up the stairs without another word. Ethan did not stop me. He stood motionless in the kitchen, his shadow long in the dim light. That night I did not sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, my hands still clutching the silver bracelet my mother used to wear. Inside me, a void was beginning to form. Not the emptiness of someone who had just lost a love, but the quiet of someone who has cleared away a long-held illusion. Ethan was no longer someone I could lean on. And Morgan had crossed the line beyond ordinary jealousy. She had moved to another level where things were created not just to wound but to destroy. I began to think about the next step. No longer just confrontation, explanation, or reclaiming justice with words. It was about protecting myself decisively and completely, my honor and the peace I had left. Because even if Ethan repented, even if Morgan continued to stage another drama, I was no longer the woman who sat in the dark and waited for the truth to come find her. I would step into the light, truth in hand, and leave behind everything unworthy of remaining in my life. I walked into my lawyer's office with a file in my hands. Every page was organized as if for a final performance. But this time it was not a product launch. It was a legal battle I could not afford to lose. My attorney was Clara Jennings, a woman in her 40s, calm and incisive. She had represented many women-owned businesses, and when I contacted her she asked one question: how far are you willing to go to reclaim justice for yourself? I answered by handing over the entire video from the security system, the recording of my conversation with Daniel, the money transfer messages from Morgan to the suspended doctor, the verification from the obstetrics clinic, and the investigation file from Lucas. Claire could not hide a satisfied look. We have a strong case. She fabricated the pregnancy, made false statements before dozens of people, and caused serious damage to your reputation, personally and to your brand. This is deliberate defamation, plus actions that negatively impacted your business. I nodded. I want her held accountable. And Ethan? Claire asked, eyes on the file. I'm filing for divorce, I said without hesitation. He is no longer someone I can trust. And I won't be tied to anyone who stayed silent while someone intentionally tried to ruin my life. Clara nodded and quickly got to work. In less than 2 weeks she filed a lawsuit against Morgan in the Dallas County Court for defamation and fabricating a pregnancy to damage my image, honor, and business reputation. At the same time, the divorce papers were served to Ethan, with a claim for division of assets according to our prenuptial agreement. The first call came from Diane. I didn't answer. She left a long, almost hissing voicemail. You're taking this too far. This is family. Morgan may be wrong, but she's still your sister. And Ethan, he's your husband after all. You are shaming all of us. I deleted the message without hesitation. Family that cannot protect one another is not entitled to demand loyalty, especially when that loyalty is bought with silent nods to injustice. The first hearing was at the county family court, in a wide room under harsh white lighting, where the air felt heavy enough that you had to breathe with more reason than instinct. Ethan arrived early. He sat alone, staring at the floor, saying nothing. I did not sit near him. Clara and her paralegal sat by my side, holding a thick notebook of notes. Morgan walked in 5 minutes late with Diane. She wore a high-neck black dress, no makeup, and tried to look fragile. Diane, on the other hand, was composed, but her face showed fatigue and stress. The judge was an older man, salt and pepper hair, tall and decisive. He flipped through the file and then looked at Morgan. You are being sued for making false statements about being pregnant, which have directly affected the plaintiff's private life and commercial property, Savannah Whitaker. What do you have to say? Morgan stood, her voice trembling. I was under pressure. I didn't think the consequences would be this serious. I didn't mean to hurt her. Clara rose. Then explain the video the plaintiff presented, in which you deliberately hand an envelope containing a fake ultrasound to Savannah's husband just before claiming pregnancy in front of more than 70 people. Or explain why you transferred money to a doctor whose license was revoked in order to buy a sample ultrasound. Morgan was silent. Diane tugged at her daughter's sleeve, but the judge raised a hand to stop anyone speaking for the defendant. No one may speak on behalf of the accused. Morgan swallowed. I was wrong. But I only wanted his attention. At that point, Ethan stood. His voice was clear, no longer evasive. I confirm. I met Morgan privately 3 times. I had relations with her once, after an argument with Savannah. That was my fault. But I had no knowledge of her faking a pregnancy or making the statement at the party. I did not participate in that scheme. The judge turned to me. Do you have anything to add? I stood slowly. I want to affirm, I am not suing out of anger but for honor. She used my private pain, the inability to have children, to humiliate me before people I trusted. She didn't just try to destroy my marriage. She tried to trample the business I built with my own hands. The courtroom fell silent. Then Richard, my father, suddenly entered. Though he had no official role in the case, he had asked to speak and the judge allowed it. He looked at Morgan, then at Diane. I have kept silent too long. But I cannot continue to fund, protect, or shield lies and cruelty. As of today, I am cutting off all financial support to Morgan. And I want to publicly apologize to my daughter, Savannah, for not protecting her sooner. Diane turned her face away. Morgan froze. For the first time I saw her no longer playing the victim, just a small woman in a room where masks had been stripped away. The hearing did not conclude that day, but the outcome was already clear. No further defense was needed. No one asked for mercy. Everything had been exposed. And the most important thing was, I had reclaimed the truth with my own voice. Not in rage but through the law. Not for revenge but to go on living, as someone no longer afraid of the darkness others tried to lay on her. After the final hearing, I left the courtroom with legs that felt numb, but inside a new kind of quiet. Not easy relief, but the sense of having finally put down a heavy stone that had burdened my heart for too long. Morgan could not raise her head after the ruling. She left the courthouse in silence, neither crying nor pleading. It was as if she had peeled off her last mask and realized no one would trust her again. 2 weeks later, I heard she was fired from her position as a communications assistant at an event company in Addison, where she'd been for less than 6 months. The official reason was serious misconduct damaging the company's reputation. In reality, nobody wanted to be associated with a name dragged into court for faking a pregnancy to smear her sister. Her former friends, the same people who had snickered behind my back at the wedding and shared photos of that memorable anniversary as if it were a joke, went quiet. Some quietly removed her from their networks. Others openly criticized her behavior in local women's groups. Morgan, who once craved recognition and sympathy, was now isolated by the very social circle she had fought to be part of at all costs. Diane left after a furious fight with my father. They had been the practical couple, more stable than passionate, she calculating, he quietly tolerant. But after my father publicly cut off all financial support for Morgan, Diane felt betrayed. She packed her things and left a note with a few words. I cannot live with a man who chooses his daughter over our family. My father didn't say much when he told me. He quietly poured tea, then, tired from carrying too many mistakes he hadn't fixed, said, I stayed silent for 15 years, Savannah. Maybe silence is the only way this ends now. Ethan was different. He didn't leave. He called, wrote handwritten letters, sent emails, left voicemail messages. All apologizing, all repeating that he had erred just once, and that everything after that was consequences he hadn't expected. He said he missed me, missed our little house, missed dinners on the back porch, missed the way I smiled softly when his pasta came out burnt. I didn't reply. Not out of hatred, but because I couldn't go back to a place where I had to question my own worth just to keep a man who lacked the courage. I sold the old house and moved to a loft near downtown. There was no longer a garden to prune, no outdoor kitchen for weekend evenings, but each morning I could look out through a tall window and watch the city shift, see sunlight pour down as if no one had ever broken my trust. 3 months later, I began to notice changes in my body. I grew tired more quickly after meetings. I wanted to nap in the middle of the day, something that had never happened in 10 busy years. I blamed stress and age until one night I sat in front of the bathroom mirror, looked into my own eyes and whispered, something isn't right. I went to the clinic I had used years before. Jameson was still there. The same doctor who had once told me gently that my chances of becoming a mother were about 5%. She studied me carefully. It could be hormones from stress, she said. But to be sure, let's run a blood test first. 2 days later she called. Her voice trembled a little, as if she could hardly believe what she was about to say. Savannah, the results show you're pregnant. Naturally. I sat still, my hands gripping the edge of the chair. Everything around me fell silent. What? I blurted, not sure what I was even asking. 6 weeks along, she said. A steady heartbeat. It's real. I left the clinic with one hand on my belly, the other holding the small ultrasound print. A faint image of a tiny life growing inside me. Not fake, not a tool to hold on to someone, not a means to manipulate anyone, but a miraculous gift I had nearly stopped daring to hope for. That night I told no one. I went home and put the ultrasound in a frame on my desk. I didn't think about Ethan or Morgan or the fertility verdict that had hung over me like a sentence. I only thought about a child. Someone who came to me not because I was perfect, not because I was beautiful or successful, but because we had touched something in the midst of brokenness. I started rewriting my life. Every morning became a new chapter. I walked more, ate more carefully, turned my phone off late at night. I hired a team to redesign my brand, but I kept the name Strive, because that is what I had been doing and would continue to do, persisting relentlessly even when everything seemed to be against me. I didn't know how the future would unfold. I didn't promise I would never be hurt again. But I knew from that point on I no longer had to stretch myself thin to hold on to a wrong love or wrestle with relationships built on jealousy and manipulation. I would be a mother. Not because a doctor sanctioned it, not because society expected it, but because my heart finally believed I was worthy of love, full, peaceful, and unconditional. What about you? If you were me, how would you respond to a blow that hit not only a would-be child but also a past neglected and overlooked for years? Would you have the courage to stand up like my husband did, or would you stay silent, waiting for something to change? This story is not only about a tearful Christmas-time dinner. It's a reminder that in every family, however close, boundaries and respect are necessary. Sometimes only by daring to set limits can the good things really begin. If you've experienced something similar, share it with me in the comments below. I'd love to hear your story. And don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss other touching, dramatic, and humane stories about family life. Because maybe somewhere among those stories is you.